The flashing red and blue lights in the distance sent a chill down Megan's spine. She gripped the kitchen counter, her knuckles turning white as she watched the HOA agents stride up the driveway toward her front door. Adrenaline surged through her veins. This was it, the confrontation she had been dreading. Megan's heart raced as she heard the sharp knock. Swallowing hard, she pulled open the door to face the two imposing figures. "Can I help you?" "Ma'am, we've received a complaint about your property," the taller agent stated, his voice stern. "There's an issue with your fence that needs to be addressed immediately." Megan felt her blood boil. "I don't recall giving you permission to trespass on my land." She crossed her arms defiantly, blocking their entry. The shorter agent stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. "We're authorized to inspect the premises. Now, if you'll kindly step aside." Megan stood her ground, jaw clenched. "I won't. This is my home, and you have no right to barge in without my consent." The taller agent's expression darkened. "Ma'am, if you continue to obstruct us, we'll have no choice but to call the police." Megan's mind raced. She knew her rights, but the thought of a confrontation with the authorities made her stomach twist. Still, she refused to back down. "Go ahead. Call them. I'll be happy to explain the situation to them." The agents exchanged a glance, clearly taken aback by her defiance. Megan seized the moment, raising her voice. "In fact, why don't we all wait right here for the police? I'm sure they'd be interested to hear about the HOA's unlawful trespassing." The shorter agent's jaw tightened. "This isn't over, ma'am. We'll be back with a court order if necessary." With that, the two agents turned and stalked back to their car, their footsteps heavy with frustration. Megan watched them go, her heart pounding in her ears. She knew this was just the beginning. Closing the door, Megan hurried to the kitchen, grabbing her phone. She needed to call her husband, Daniel, and warn him about the confrontation. As the phone rang, she tried to steady her shaking hands. "Daniel, you need to come home," she said, her voice tense. "The HOA agents were just here, and they're threatening to get a court order to inspect the property." Daniel's response was immediate. "I'm on my way. Stay inside and keep the doors locked. I'll be there as soon as I can." Megan ended the call, her mind racing. She glanced out the window, watching the agent's car disappear down the street. A surge of anger and fear coursed through her. This was her home, her family's sanctuary, and she refused to let the HOA trample all over it. Suddenly, a movement in the backyard caught her eye. Megan's breath caught in her throat as she spotted two figures creeping along the fence line. Her heart pounded. The agents must have come back, and they were trying to find another way in. Without hesitation, Megan reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out a small remote. Pressing a button, she watched as the gates to the backyard swung open, and two massive German shepherds bounded out, their hackles raised and their teeth bared. Megan gripped the counter, her knuckles turning white as she waited, her eyes fixed on the intruders. This was her home, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. The two German shepherds raced across the backyard, their powerful jaws open and their growls echoing through the air. Megan watched from the kitchen window, her heart pounding as the intruders scrambled to get away. One of the figures, a woman in a blazer and skirt, tripped and fell, letting out a terrified scream. The other, a man in a suit, bolted for the fence, only to be tackled by the larger of the two dogs. Megan took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She knew she had to be careful. These were trained security dogs, and she didn't want anyone to get seriously hurt. But she also couldn't let the HOA agents trespass on her property. Suddenly, the sound of a siren pierced the air, and Megan's stomach twisted. The police were on their way, and she knew she had to act fast. Stepping outside, she called out to the dogs, her voice firm and commanding. "Nero, Kira, stand down." The shepherds immediately obeyed, releasing the man and backing away. Megan hurried to the fallen woman, helping her to her feet. Are you all right? She asked, trying to keep her tone even. The woman's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. Ah, yes, I think so, she stammered. Megan nodded, then turned to the man, who was now standing with his hands raised. And you? We were just trying to do our job, the man said, his voice shaking. We didn't mean any harm. Megan raised an eyebrow. Your job doesn't include trespassing on private property without permission. She glanced at the dogs, who were now sitting obediently at her side. Now, I suggest you both leave before my dogs decide to get a little more enthusiastic. The two agents didn't need to be told twice. They hurried back toward the front of the house, where the sound of the approaching police siren was growing louder. Megan watched them go, her shoulders sagging with relief. She knew the confrontation was far from over, but at least she'd managed to keep the HOA agents off her property for now. As the police car pulled into the driveway, Megan took a deep breath and stepped forward to meet the officers. She knew she had to be careful. Her background as a former Secret Service agent wasn't something she advertised, and she didn't want to risk drawing unnecessary attention. Officers, she said, her voice calm and composed. Thank you for responding so quickly. There's been a bit of a misunderstanding with the HOA agents. The two officers exchanged a glance. Then the taller one stepped forward. Ma'am, we received a report of a disturbance. Can you tell us what happened? Megan nodded, keeping her tone matter of fact. The HOA agents came onto my property without permission, and when I refused to let them in, they threatened to get a court order. Then they tried to sneak in through the backyard, and my dogs. She gestured toward the German shepherds, who were now sitting quietly at her side. The officer's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the powerful dogs. I see. Well, it sounds like you've got the situation under control. He paused, then added, but just to be safe, we'll stick around for a bit, make sure everything stays calm. Megan nodded, relieved. Thank you, officer. I appreciate your help. As the police car parked in the driveway, Megan couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She had stood her ground, and for now, the HOA agents had backed off. But she knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. Daniel burst through the front door, his eyes wild with concern. Megan, are you all right? Megan hurried to his side, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. I'm fine, honey. The HOA agents tried to trespass, but I handled it. Daniel's gaze swept over the scene, taking in the police car and the two German shepherds sitting calmly by Megan's side. I see that. What exactly happened? Megan quickly recounted the confrontation, her voice tense but controlled. They threatened to get a court order, so I called the police. And when they tried to sneak in through the backyard, the dogs took care of them. Daniel's brow furrowed. Megan, you know we can't keep using the dogs like this. It's only going to escalate the situation. Megan shook her head. I didn't have a choice, Daniel. They were trespassing, and I had to protect our home. The taller police officer approached them, his expression serious. Ma'am, sir, I need to get a statement from both of you about what happened. Megan nodded, then turned to Daniel. Why don't you go inside and check on the kids? I'll handle this. Daniel hesitated, his gaze filled with worry, but he ultimately nodded and headed into the house, leaving Megan to face the officer alone. All right, ma'am. Let's start from the beginning, the officer said, his pen poised over his notepad. Megan took a deep breath and began recounting the events, carefully choosing her words to avoid mentioning her former career or the specialized training of her dogs. She knew that any connection to the Secret Service could complicate matters, and she didn't want to draw unnecessary attention. As she finished her statement, the officer nodded, his expression thoughtful. Well, it sounds like you did what you had to do to protect your property. But I would advise against using the dogs to confront the HOA agents again. That could escalate the situation and lead to more serious consequences. Megan nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. I understand, officer. I'll do my best to avoid any further confrontations. The officer seemed satisfied with her response. All right then. I'll be sure to pass along your statement to the HOA. Hopefully, they'll get the message and leave you alone. Megan thanked the officer and watched as he returned to his car, the siren finally fading into the distance. With a sigh, she turned and headed back into the house, her mind already racing with thoughts of what the HOA might do next. As she entered the living room, she found Daniel sitting on the couch, his face etched with concern. How did it go with the cops? Megan sank down beside him, her shoulders sagging. They seemed to understand the situation, but they warned me about using the dogs again. I don't know what the HOA is going to do next, Daniel. Daniel wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. We'll figure it out, Megan. We're not going to let them push us around. Megan nodded, drawing strength from her husband's embrace. She knew that the battle with the HOA was far from over, but she was determined to protect her family and her home, no matter what it took. The following morning, Megan and Daniel sat at the kitchen table, their breakfast untouched as they pored over a stack of legal documents. The HOA had wasted no time in escalating the situation, and they were now facing the threat of a hefty fine and a court-ordered inspection of their property. This is outrageous, Megan muttered, her eyes narrowed as she scanned the paperwork. They're claiming we're in violation of the community guidelines, but their demands are completely unreasonable. Daniel nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. I knew this was going to happen. The HOA has been looking for any excuse to come down on us ever since we moved in. Megan's fingers tightened around the documents, her knuckles turning white. Well, they're not going to get away with it. I'm not going to let them bully us out of our own home. Daniel reached across the table, gently prying the papers from her hands. I know, honey, but we need to be smart about this. We can't just charge in and start a war with the HOA. Megan let out a frustrated sigh. Then what do you suggest we do? Just roll over and let them walk all over us. No, of course not, Daniel said, his voice calm and reassuring. We need to fight this, but we need to do it the right way. We need to get a lawyer, someone who can navigate the legal system and help us protect our rights. Megan nodded, her mind already whirring with a plan. Okay, you're right. Let me make a few calls, see if I can find someone who specializes in HOA disputes. As Megan dialed the first number, the sound of the doorbell echoed through the house. She exchanged a wary glance with Daniel before heading to the front door, Nero and Kira at her heels. Peering through the peephole, Megan's heart sank. It was the HOA agents, and they weren't alone. They were accompanied by a uniformed police officer. Taking a deep breath, Megan opened the door, her expression guarded. Can I help you? The taller agent stepped forward, his face set in a stern expression. Ma'am, we have a court order to inspect your property. We need you to allow us access immediately. Megan felt a surge of panic, but she refused to show it. I'm sorry, but I've already spoken to a lawyer, and they'd advised me not to allow any inspections without a proper warrant. The agent's eyes narrowed. This is a valid court order, ma'am. If you continue to refuse, we'll have no choice but to arrest you for obstruction of justice. Megan's mind raced as she glanced at the police officer, who was watching the exchange with a neutral expression. She knew she had to tread carefully, but she wasn't about to back down. I understand the court order, but I'm still going to have to refuse, she said, her voice steady. I have rights, and I'm not going to let you trample all over them. The agent's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Megan thought he might try to force his way in. But then, he stepped back, his expression darkening. Fine, he spat. We'll be back with a new order, and you can be sure there will be consequences for your defiance. With that, the agents and the officer turned and left, leaving Megan standing in the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this was just the beginning of a long and bitter battle, but she was determined to stand her ground. As the HOA agents and the police officer disappeared down the driveway, Megan closed the door with a shaky hand. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, and she knew that the confrontation was far from over. Turning to Daniel, she could see the same mixture of fear and determination in his eyes. "They're not going to give up, are they?" he asked, his voice low. Megan shook her head, her jaw set in a hard line. "No, they're not. And we can't afford to back down, either." Daniel reached out and squeezed her hand, his grip firm. "I know. We've got to fight this, no matter what it takes." Megan nodded, her mind already racing with a plan. "I'll call the lawyer again, see if they can get us an emergency injunction to block the inspection. In the meantime, we need to make sure the house and the yard are secure." Daniel's eyes widened, and he glanced toward the backyard, where the 2 German shepherds were pacing restlessly. "You don't think they'll try to sneak in again, do you?" Megan's expression hardened. "I wouldn't put it past them. And this time, I won't be so quick to call the dogs off." Daniel hesitated, his brow furrowed. "Megan, I know you're trying to protect us, but we can't keep using the dogs like that. It's only going to make things worse." Megan sighed, running a hand through her hair. I know. But I don't know what else to do, Daniel. We're running out of options, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let them take our home from us." Daniel pulled her into a tight embrace, and Megan felt some of the tension drain from her body. "We'll figure this out, Megan," he murmured. "I promise." Megan nodded, taking a deep breath. She knew that Daniel was right, that they needed to find a more sustainable solution. But in the moment, all she could think about was protecting her family and her home. Pulling away, she turned and headed toward the kitchen, where she had left her phone. As she dialed the lawyer's number, she could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. This was a fight she couldn't afford to lose. The lawyer answered on the second ring, and Megan quickly explained the latest developments. "They showed up with a court order, and they're threatening to arrest me if I don't let them in," she said, her voice strained. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then the lawyer's voice came through, calm and reassuring. "Okay, Megan, don't worry. I'm going to file an emergency motion to block the inspection. In the meantime, I'd advise you to comply with the court order, but make it clear that you're doing so under protest." Megan felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you, I really appreciate it. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my family." "I know you will, Megan," the lawyer replied. "Just stay strong, and we'll get through this." As Megan ended the call, she felt a renewed sense of determination. She might not be able to stop the HOA agents from inspecting her property, but she would be damned if she was going to let them break her spirit. This was her home, and she was going to fight for it, no matter what it took. The sound of the front door opening made Megan's heart leap into her throat. She watched as the HOA agents and the police officer stepped into the foyer, their expressions grim. "Ma'am, we're here to conduct the court-ordered inspection," the taller agent said, his voice stern. Megan took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "I understand, but I want to make it clear that I'm only allowing this under protest. My lawyer is working to get an emergency injunction to block the inspection." The agent's eyes narrowed. "That's your prerogative, ma'am, but if you continue to obstruct us, you'll be arrested for contempt of court." Megan clenched her jaw, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not obstructing anything. I'm simply exercising my rights as a homeowner." The officer stepped forward, his expression neutral. "Ma'am, I'd advise you to cooperate fully with the inspection. The last thing anyone wants is for this to escalate into a confrontation." Megan knew the officer was right, but the thought of allowing the HOA agents to invade her home made her skin crawl. Still, she nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but I want to be present for the entire inspection, and I reserve the right to document everything." The agent seemed satisfied with this compromise. "Agreed. Now, if you'll please show us around the property." Megan led the group through the house, her body tense and her senses on high alert. She could feel the dog's eyes following them, their low growls echoing through the hallways. As they stepped into the backyard, Megan couldn't help but notice the way the agent's eyes widened at the sight of the German shepherds. "I trust you be careful not to provoke my dogs," she said, her tone laced with warning. The agent nodded, his expression cautious. "We'll be sure to keep our distance." The inspection seemed to drag on for hours, with the agents scrutinizing every inch of the property and making copious notes. Megan watched them like a hawk, her fingers twitching with the urge to call the dogs to her side. Finally, the agents finished their inspection and turned to Megan, their faces unreadable. "We've documented several violations of the community guidelines," the taller agent said. "You'll be receiving a formal notice with the details and a deadline for remediation." Megan felt a surge of anger, but she kept her composure. "I'm sure my lawyer will have something to say about that." The agent shrugged. "That's your prerogative. But if you fail to comply, we'll have no choice but to take further legal action." With that, the group turned and headed back toward the front of the house. Megan watched them go, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that this was far from over, and that the HOA was just getting started. As the door closed behind them, Megan felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She leaned against the wall, her eyes closed, and let out a long, shaky breath. "It's going to be okay, Megan," Daniel said, his voice soft and reassuring as he wrapped his arms around her. "We're going to get through this, I promise." Megan nodded, clinging to her husband's embrace. She knew that the battle was far from over, but she was determined to fight, no matter what it took. The next few days were a blur of activity as Megan and Daniel worked tirelessly to prepare for their legal battle with the HOA. Their lawyer had filed the emergency injunction to block the inspection, but the court date was still several days away, leaving them with little time to get their ducks in a row. Megan spent hours poring over the community guidelines, searching for any loopholes or inconsistencies that they could use to their advantage. Meanwhile, Daniel was busy gathering documentation and reaching out to other homeowners who had faced similar battles with the HOA. The tension in the house was palpable, and Megan found herself constantly on edge, her nerves frayed by the constant threat of the HOA's retaliation. She knew that they were playing a dangerous game, but she refused to back down. One evening, as Megan was preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. Her heart sank as she peered through the peephole and saw the familiar faces of the HOA agents. Steeling herself, she pulled open the door, her expression guarded. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice clipped. The taller agent stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. "We've got a notice for you, ma'am, regarding the violations we found during the inspection." Megan felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to show any sign of fear. "I'm aware of the violations, and my lawyer will be addressing them in court." The agent's lips curled into a smug smile. "Well, that's the thing, ma'am. You've got 30 days to bring your property into compliance, or will be forced to take further action." Megan's eyes widened in disbelief. 30 days? That's hardly enough time to address all of the so-called violations you found. The agent shrugged. "That's not our problem, ma'am. If you fail to comply, we'll have no choice but to levy fines and possibly even take legal action to have you removed from the property." Megan felt her blood boil, but she forced herself to remain calm. "We'll be in touch with our lawyer, and you can be sure that we'll be fighting this every step of the way." The agent's expression darkened. "I wouldn't recommend that, ma'am. The more you fight, the harder we'll push back." With that, the agents turned and headed back to their car, leaving Megan standing in the doorway, her heart pounding. She knew that they were playing a dangerous game, but she was determined to see it through. As she closed the door, Daniel emerged from the kitchen, his face etched with concern. "What happened? What did they say?" Megan quickly filled him in, her voice tense. "They're giving us 30 days to fix all of the violations they found, or they'll start fining us and possibly even try to evict us." Daniel's eyes widened in alarm. 30 days? That's impossible. We'll never be able to get all of that work done in time. Megan nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. I know. But we have to try, Daniel. We can't let them push us out of our own home. Daniel reached out and pulled her into a tight embrace, his body trembling with emotion. I'm so sorry, Megan. I wish there was something more we could do. Megan clung to him, her own tears threatening to spill over. We'll figure it out, Daniel. We have to. This is our home, and we're not going to let them take it from us without a fight. As they stood there, holding each other in the dimly lit hallway, Megan knew that the battle was far from over. But she was more determined than ever to see it through, no matter what it took. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Megan and Daniel worked around the clock to address the HOA's long list of violations. They've hired contractors, organized work crews, and poured every spare moment into transforming their home and yard to meet the community guidelines. Despite their best efforts, it became clear that they would never be able to complete all the required work within the 30-day deadline. Megan's anxiety grew with each passing day, and she found herself constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived, and Megan and Daniel sat nervously in the courtroom, their lawyer by their side. The HOA representatives were there as well, their expressions smug and self-assured. As the judge called the case, Megan's heart pounded in her chest. She knew that this was their last chance to stop the HOA from trampling all over their rights. The lawyer stood and laid out their case, citing the unreasonable timeline and the excessive nature of the violations. He argued passionately that the HOA was overstepping its bounds and using the community guidelines as a weapon to harass and intimidate the homeowners. The HOA's attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, countered with a scathing rebuttal. He accused Megan and Daniel of willfully ignoring the guidelines and claimed that their refusal to comply was a flagrant disregard for the community's rules. As the arguments volleyed back and forth, Megan felt her heart sinking. She could see the judge's expression growing more and more skeptical, and she knew that they were losing ground. Finally, the judge raised a hand, silencing the attorneys. I've heard enough. While I understand the homeowners' concerns, the fact remains that they are in clear violation of the community guidelines. The HOA's demands, while aggressive, are within their legal rights. Megan felt her stomach drop, and she gripped Daniel's hand tightly. This couldn't be happening. They had fought so hard, and now it was all for naught. The judge continued, his tone firm. However, I do have some concerns about the unreasonable timeline given the scope of the work required. I'm going to grant a 60-day extension for the homeowners to address the violations, and I'll be keeping a close eye on the progress. Megan felt a surge of relief, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that they were still facing an uphill battle. The HOA representatives looked displeased, but they nodded reluctantly, acknowledging the judge's decision. As they left the courthouse, Megan and Daniel walked in silence, the weight of the situation bearing down on them. They knew that the fight was far from over, and that the HOA would likely find other ways to make their lives miserable. But as they reached their car, Megan turned to Daniel, her eyes shining with determination. We're not giving up, Daniel. We're going to fight this, no matter what it takes. Daniel nodded, his expression mirroring her own. I know, Megan, and we're going to win. We have to. With renewed resolve, they climbed into the car and drove home, ready to face the next phase of their battle with the HOA. They knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but they were more determined than ever to protect their home and their family.